You know, it's hard to believe, as I mentioned, that this is the fourth week that we are live streaming our services. Not only our church, but churches around the world are live streaming. We're unable to gather because of this time. For some of us, being home all day, being quarantined, being limited, not being able to go out, it can be a draining, even discouraging time. But in this time of quarantine, we are faced to slow down. We're forced to slow down. And it can be easy in some ways to maybe waste time by being frustrated, maybe turning to different escapes like binge watching shows and all that. Now, I think some of that is okay, but I think there's also here an opportunity that we have to maximize, optimize, by using this time to thoughtfully grow in wisdom as we're forced to slow down, forced to reflect, forced not to be so busy like we normally are. There's a time to thoughtfully grow in wisdom. Now, wisdom is something very important in our lives. And, for myself, I lack a lot of wisdom. But I know that wisdom is so important, and I want to always grow in wisdom. And so that's why many times in our church, I've often come back to the book of Ecclesiastes because, years ago we preached through the book of Ecclesiastes, and I feel like this is a book about wisdom. King Solomon, who's the author of this book, he was a man with everything in life at his disposal. He had all the power of the kingdom. And he had no wars to fight. He lived in a time of peace and prosperity because his father, King David, he had done all the fighting and shed all the blood. And so Solomon was able to reap the rewards of all that. Peace, prosperity, comfort. Solomon had more money and wealth than he knew what to do with. He was the richest man probably ever to live. The Queen of Sheba came once to visit, and the Queen of Sheba marveled at how wealthy Solomon was and all the splendor of the kingdom. Solomon was a man with all the relationships he wanted. He had supposedly 1,000 women in his life. He had 300 wives, and it said that he had 700 concubines. He had everything that you could desire. Solomon, he declared his life to be an experiment of indulgence. He would indulge in everything that was available in this life under the sun, and he wanted to find out what brings satisfaction. He wanted to satisfy himself in every way through all the things that this world could offer. Now, if you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, it's interesting because after all that, and many of those things are the things that we often pursue, that we're often in the rat race for. His conclusion of this lifelong experiment was that, none of those things offer what we're really looking for. His conclusion was that under the sun in this world, nothing satisfies. In other words, nothing really makes us happy. He says, I've tried it all. I've tried everything we can indulge ourselves in, and nothing really makes us happy. So this is the wisdom that he's sharing with us, the wisdom that he wants us to have in our lives. So he summarizes in this chapter by talking about 7 things, I think, that are better. He's saying, in my wisdom, what I've learned is that it's better to think these ways than the way the world often thinks. And so what we'd like to do is we're going to follow what his argument is here about the 7 things that are better. So 7 things that we'll walk through this morning. So first of all, I'm going to walk through each one real quickly. Number 1, Solomon here says, better is our death day than birthday. Look at verse 1. He says, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. So what Solomon is doing is he's differentiating the day of our death, when you die, and the day of our birth, when you're born. Now, why does he make this comparison? He says a good name is better than precious ointment. Well, in Hebrew culture, your name, you were given a name, and your name was very significant. It revealed a lot about your character and who you were going to become. So your name given at birth often had to do with inward character, qualities that you would grow into, but precious ointment or perfume described here was just an outward covering, a fragrance that was given over you when you were born. It doesn't last, but it's given to you, a smell that's given to you as when you're born. So on your birthday as a baby, nobody knows what kind of character you're going to have in your life, but he's saying when you die and people eulogize about you, everyone knows who you were. Everyone knows about your character as they speak about your life. So Solomon here is arguing that the day of death is better because the day of death reveals who you really were. It's a better day because God will reward us not by how we smell to the world, but who we really are in his eyes. So Solomon's advice here is we ought to live our lives building our character. Precious ointment is like a spray of perfume. It fills the air for a moment. It briefly lasts, but what happens? After a while, it vanishes. But character is what lasts for a lifetime. I have a friend who's a doctor in New York City right now, and he's definitely on the front lines with the COVID-19 crisis. When I was a pastor in Philadelphia years ago, I discipled him for a while. He was in my small group. He grew in that small group so much. And so every day he's been posting on Facebook pictures of himself wearing his protective equipment. And then, he's definitely in the midst of the hardest situations. Sometimes he puts a hashtag that says, #trying not to die. I'm praying for him that he wouldn't catch the virus and that, of course, he wouldn't die. However, as believers, I think what Solomon would say our hashtag should read, it should read that we are #getting ready to die. When we live getting ready to die throughout our lives, we build character as we make everything count. So we ought to look forward to our death day because that's when we'll be home. That's when who we are will really be revealed. That's when what people say about our lives will be shown. And so choosing to live in preparation for our death day leads to wisdom, according to Solomon. Number 2, Solomon says, better funerals than weddings. Number 2 of 7. He says, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. So his point is that if we go to funerals, it's actually more beneficial because going to funerals and going to wedding parties, as he's describing, is very different. There's benefit of going to a funeral, a house of mourning, because when you are alive, you need to be reminded of that moment of what happens when we die. At a funeral, it's unavoidable because you need to think about it. And a funeral reminds you about that day that is also coming for each one of us. These days there are probably thousands of funerals happening in the world right now. We need to attend them in our thoughts and think too about how frail we are and how we too are going to die from a virus called sin someday. When you think about comparing going to a wedding party and going to a funeral, I've been to both, we can compare them a little bit. A party, let's say a wedding reception, you enjoy it tonight. But at a funeral, it forces you to think and to prepare for tomorrow. At a party, you might forget about the past. At a funeral, you evaluate your past. At a party, you might want to let go of pains and escape them. But at a funeral, you hold on and you cling to grace. A party is over when the morning comes, but a funeral is like a morning that never ends. My professor in seminary, at this preaching class, he talked about preaching at weddings and funerals. And he said, when you preach at a wedding, you got to do it, of course, as a pastor, but at a wedding, people are never listening to your sermon. Women are checking out the bride and bridesmaids, what they're wearing. Men are checking out the bridesmaids. No one is listening. But he said, at a funeral, everyone is listening. There's something about a funeral when you preach where you have everyone's attention, because people are thinking about life and death, because it never gets more real than at a funeral. I think this is the wisdom that Solomon is sharing once. He's saying you need to go to the house of mourning, go to funerals, think about those things, because it causes you to think about what your life is and to evaluate. Just a side suggestion is, I think great wisdom I once heard is that it is okay to miss some of the weddings that you're invited to, but you ought never miss a funeral if you can. Wedding is about the bride and groom. They won't really remember if you were there or not because it's a blur to them. But a funeral is when people really need you, and it strengthens them to show up. So we learned from Solomon that we need to attend funerals. We need to think about the house of mourning so that we evaluate our lives, so that we grow in wisdom. Number 3, Solomon says, better mourning than laughing. Look at verse 3. He says, sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Now, this is not a prohibition to laugh and have fun. We should do that. We should have fun. We should laugh. It is healthy for us. But the point here that Solomon is making is that he does not want us to laugh our way through life. He does not want us to make life a joke. Instead, he's saying there should be a seriousness about the realities of life. Solomon's thought here is that if you realize, and if you stand in front of, that you'll stand in front of God someday, wouldn't there be some sense of seriousness that you have? So the wise person, he's saying, enjoys life and laughs a lot, enjoys life in that way, but also at the same time lives with a heavy heart, because they know that one day they will stand before God. When we stand before God, we're accountable. We're accountable for how we lived out our various callings in our life. When I stand before God, I'm accountable for my calling as a husband. How did I live my life? How did I love and serve my wife? When I stand before God, I'm accountable for my calling as a father. How did I care for my children? How did I raise them well? Did I raise them in the Lord? I'm accountable for my calling as a pastor. How did I love and serve my church? How was I faithful to my calling? I'm accountable for my calling just as a Christian, as a follower of Christ. Was I obedient to whatever the Lord was doing, how he was leading in my life? So wisdom is grown not by laughing through life, but also having a sense of seriousness, knowing the weight of our callings. Is there seriousness to your life right now? Where you look at your life and you're not just passing the days, but you're thinking about, how do I live the best to the Lord? How do I give my heart to the Lord through these callings that I have every single day? If we laugh our way through life, then we'll never know when to say no. But if there is a seriousness about our life, we can make decisions and choices that are based on our callings, that are out of wisdom. Number 4, Solomon says, better helpful words than pleasant words. Look at verse 5. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So Solomon here is wisely teaching us that if you want to live really looking ahead to that death day, really looking ahead to your funeral, looking ahead towards eternity, there are times when you need to hear from others words that are helpful for your soul. Notice I didn't say words that feel good necessarily. They could, but words that are helpful for your soul. So here he's picturing someone in your life who will wisely rebuke you, wisely rebuke us at times, also at times encourage us, so that we carefully think about how we're living our lives. It causes us to evaluate with an honest assessment. We have to ask ourselves, with the words of my friends, with the words of my family group, with the words of someone close to me, would I rather have them helping my life, or would I rather have them just tickling my ears with what I want to hear? A question I once heard was, would you rather have sweet poison that kills or bitter medicine that heals? Solomon's advice here to us is, go spend time with people who love God and who really love you. Not just people who are fun to be around, but the ones who will really help you to live your life well. So I encourage you, based on what Solomon is saying, make sure you have one or two people in your life who you give total permission to say whatever they need to you, whenever they need to, out of love for your soul. No fear on their part, because they know that they have permission to speak into your life words of encouragement, words of rebuke, whatever will be helpful, because they love you and they love your soul. Better are helpful words than just pleasant words all the time. Number 5 for Solomon, he says, better the end than the beginning. Look at verse 8. He says, better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the hearts of fools. Now, as you look at this, Solomon, he's learned that it's always better to be a person that perseveres. You're thinking about the end. In other words, he's saying, please don't be a quitter. Don't be the one that gives up on things or gives up on people. And he's saying the ending will be better than the beginning. So it's better to be patient even when things in life are difficult and hard. I think he points out that in our pride, we want to be in control. And we get angry when we aren't in control. And he's saying, don't let yourself get angry, because it anchors itself in your heart, and then you cannot think straight. So he says, be patient and have the end in view. If I can make a suggestion, it is good for us to learn to be patient and persevering in our lives, because the end of a thing is always better. Be patient and persevering with your family. There may be problems, of course, but there's value in patience and perseverance. Be patient and persevering with your job. It might be hard right now, but God may open doors for you if you just keep on going and you don't quit. Be patient and persevering with your church. No church is perfect. Every church is imperfect. Things change in churches. Be patient and persevering in churches as well. So being patient and persevering in life will always grow you in wisdom. And we ought not to rob ourselves of that growth of wisdom because we quit up, because we don't see the end and we give up too early. Number 6, Solomon says, better the present than the past. Verse 10 says, say not, were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. As you go through tough times, and Solomon knows that we will, Solomon, the wisest man in the world, is saying that we might be tempted to linger and reminisce in the past. Solomon was probably thinking about the Israelites, his own people. Remember when they were wandering in the wilderness? What did they do? They started complaining. God was providing manna for them every day, but they started complaining. And they started to reminisce and started to talk about garlic and leeks they had back in Egypt. They remembered the food, the produce of Egypt. They remembered all those things, but it was selective memory, and they didn't remember the harsh slavery that they were oppressed under. they start to think about the former days being better than these right now in the wilderness, even though God led them across the Red Sea, and even though he did miracle after miracle before their eyes, as we studied in the book of Joshua. Isn't that like many of us at times? We look at the days right now, and we might be unhappy. We might not like our present circumstances. We start to linger and reminisce about the past. Remember when I could go to a restaurant like 1 month ago? We reminisce about the former days. We reminisce about our life before in college. We reminisce about those days back then. Solomon is teaching us that it's foolish to always go back to the past and just linger there. He says, "For it is not from wisdom that you ask this." In other words, it is not wise to be stuck in yesterday. We should always be living today, in the present, and anticipating tomorrow, the future. Solomon's wisdom is better the present than the past. The best days are always yet to come. As a believer, do you believe that? The best days are always yet to come. Never let yourself be stuck in the past. Last but not least, Solomon says, better wisdom than money. Look at verse 11 and 12. Wisdom is good with inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So here, as Solomon wraps up this section, wisdom is compared with an inheritance that we receive, which is money, something of financial value. Both are good. Both are helpful. While we see the sun, when we look up, we're alive, we see the sun. That's what he's saying. So Solomon is saying that both are good while we're alive, while we see the sun. Both can help you in times of trouble. If you are in need, you can get out of trouble if you have money. If you have wisdom, you can discern your way out of trouble with wisdom. So while we're alive, both are good to have. But his point here is that the advantage of wisdom is that it goes beyond our time that we see the sun, beyond the time that we're alive. So wisdom, he's saying, is living this life knowing and seeing beyond the sun. It's living beyond the grave with a fear of God. And he's saying that only wisdom will lead you to know your spiritual need, because only wisdom considers your life after you stop seeing the sun, after the grave. You see, money doesn't do that, because once you die, you don't take it to the grave. It's worthless to you after the grave. Money is just for this life under the sun, and you can't buy your way to heaven. And so that's why Solomon's thought is wisdom is better than money. When God asked Solomon, God said to Solomon, Solomon, you can have anything you want. Solomon could have said, make me the richest man in the world. But what did Solomon ask from God? He said, God, I want wisdom. Out of all the things Solomon could have asked for, he said, I want wisdom. And that's what God gave him. And that's what he experienced in this life. He experienced the value of wisdom, and he realized after indulging in everything in this world that nothing in this world satisfies, but wisdom has taught him that when all of these things under the sun fail, that I see life beyond the grave, and I see a God that I'll stand before, and I see what life really is about, and I see what really matters. Do you have that kind of wisdom? Is that what you're pursuing in your life? Wisdom leads us to know that we need to prepare for eternity. During the season of the coronavirus, this is a time for wisdom. It's a time that should make us wise as we think about and reflect on those things that really matter in this life. Are we preparing for that moment beyond the grave? Do we really know Jesus in our hearts? Do those that we love really know Jesus? Have we drifted away from Jesus? And during this season, out of wisdom, may we take hold of Jesus once again in our hearts, because we realize how frail we are and how much we need Him, who is the lover of our souls. Wisdom is better than anything, including money. So as we think about these 7 things, Solomon's wisdom to us is think about these things in life. Better your funeral than your birthday, your death day, because you're going to see who you're made, what you're made of, your character. Better funerals than weddings. You're going to enter into the other side. Better mourning than laughing, seriousness of life. Better helpful words than pleasant words, because it will help you to grow. Better the end than the beginning. We got to persevere, be patient. Better the present than the past. The best days are yet to come. Better wisdom than money. We can see life beyond the grave. I hope that during this season of COVID-19 and during this difficult time, that we ourselves would grow in wisdom. I pray that you would take time to evaluate, to reflect, to consider what you spend your time in, what you prioritize, what you invest in, and really make sure that your life is one where you're living for eternity, living for what's better. As I mentioned, today's the beginning of Passion Week, Palm Sunday. Again, things are very different this year. But just because we can't meet like we normally do, that doesn't mean that we can't help the world to know about Jesus' death and resurrection this coming week. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to encourage and call for our church to do something that was actually introduced last night on the Gospel Coalition live stream. If you didn't catch the live stream that the Gospel Coalition did last night, please watch it. It's a great time of prayer that they led us in. Normally, Easter is a time when many people come to church. People who normally don't come to church for Easter. And it's a chance when they can hear the good news of the gospel. But this year, we don't have that opportunity to invite people to our church space. But that doesn't mean that we are not the church. So the call here is for everyone, and thousands of people will be doing this, is to think about your own testimony, how Jesus changed your life. And just on your phone and your laptop, just record a short video, 1-2 minutes even, and then post it and use this hashtag, Jesus changed my life, and also put links to our church website and our Facebook page. And the hope is that as many people see these posts, Jesus changed my life post, see thousands of people posting this, they would start to hear testimonies of the gospel. And as they have links to our church, to live streams at other churches, that they would tune in for an Easter service. Think about how many more people would attend Easter service via live stream because they don't have to go out. And at least it's an opportunity for many people to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. Let's pray that in this coming week, that we ourselves would remember what's better. Let's also pray that many people through this coming week would realize that Jesus is better. Living for Jesus, knowing Jesus is better than anything this world has to offer.